The late afternoon sun slipped through the lace curtains of Sweet Moments Bakery, casting warm gold across the quiet room. Eva Lancaster sat in her wheelchair, perfectly still, staring at a simple white cake with 22 candles trembling in the silence. It was her birthday, and she was completely alone. Just then, the doorbell chimed. A tall man in his early 30s walked in with his little daughter skipping beside him, clutching a tiny gift box. The girl tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering something urgent. He leaned toward Eva with a gentle smile. "Would you mind if we joined you?" Eva Lancaster had learned to measure her days by the sound of silence. In the enormous mansion her father owned, silence was louder than any noise, echoing through wide marble halls, polished floors, and rooms filled with expensive furniture she barely touched. At 22, her life looked perfect from the outside. She was the only daughter of Richard Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Technologies, a man who could bend entire markets with a single decision. But behind those glass walls of power, Eva lived like a prisoner. 4 years ago, everything had changed. One moment, she had been a bright teenager with endless possibilities, dancing barefoot on the beach with friends, dreaming of college, freedom, love. The next moment, a drunk driver ran a red light, and her world shattered in twisted metal and broken glass. Eva survived, but only from the waist down. The doctors were clear: she would never walk again. Her father provided everything money could buy: 24-hour nurses, the best doctors, a mansion redesigned to be accessible. But what he never gave was himself. His presence became rarer than sunshine in winter. Instead of sitting by her side, he buried himself in work, maybe out of fear, maybe out of guilt. Birthdays came and went with wire transfers and short text messages. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Be strong." But money couldn't hug her. It couldn't sing to her on lonely nights. It couldn't make the cake candles feel less pathetic when no one was there to blow them out. And that's how Eva ended up in Sweet Moments Bakery, alone with a cake that felt like a cruel reminder of the life she had lost. When the man and his daughter walked in, Eva barely lifted her eyes. She had grown used to people staring at her wheelchair, sometimes with pity, sometimes with discomfort. But this little girl, Lily, looked at her differently. Her eyes weren't afraid. They were curious, warm, almost glowing with recognition, as if she understood what loneliness looked like. Daniel Morris followed close behind. He was 30, his broad shoulders carrying the quiet strength of a man who worked with his hands. He wasn't the kind of man who owned skyscrapers or luxury cars. He owned calluses, worn jeans, and a pair of tired eyes that had seen too much loss but still managed to hold kindness. 5 years earlier, Daniel's life had cracked in half. His wife, Sarah, had died giving birth to their daughter. What was supposed to be the happiest day of his life became the hardest. He was left with a newborn in his arms, grief pressing against his chest like a weight he could never set down. But Daniel did what men like him always do: he kept moving. He poured his love into Lily, building furniture by day and bedtime stories by night, teaching her that sadness and joy could live in the same heart. His workshop smelled of sawdust and hope. Each piece of furniture he crafted carried memories of his wife and lessons he wanted Lily to carry, that even broken pieces of wood could be reshaped into something beautiful. Lily had grown up with that philosophy. She had her mother's bright eyes and her father's gentle soul, a combination that made her unusually sensitive to other people's feelings. Maybe it was because she had lived her whole life missing someone she never met. She learned early that love wasn't about presence, it was about connection. So when Lily spotted Eva sitting alone at the table with a cake no one else would share, she didn't hesitate. She tugged on Daniel's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, she looks so sad. We should sit with her." Daniel glanced at the young woman. Her face was pale, her posture careful, almost as if she was trying to shrink into her chair so no one noticed her. He recognized that look. He had seen it in his own reflection on the loneliest nights after Sarah's death, the look of someone drowning quietly in a crowded world. He didn't overthink it. Some decisions aren't calculated, they're simply felt. He walked over, his daughter practically bouncing with excitement beside him. "Excuse me," he said gently, careful not to startle her. "My daughter was wondering, would you mind if we joined you?" Eva blinked in surprise. Her throat tightened before she could even answer. When was the last time someone wanted to be with her without being paid to? Lily didn't wait for permission. She hopped forward and placed a tiny cupcake on the table. It had a star-shaped candle on top, slightly tilted, clearly homemade. "I'm Lily," she announced proudly. "This is for you. Daddy and I made it this morning. We come here every year because it's my mummy's birthday too. She's in heaven, but Daddy says she can still see us celebrating." Her words landed with a softness that pierced through Eva's carefully built walls. She wasn't expecting pity. She wasn't expecting charity. But this little girl had offered something much rarer: connection. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down, his movements unhurried, like someone who had learned not to rush the important moments. He nodded toward the cake in front of Eva. "That's a beautiful cake, but no one should celebrate alone." Eva's eyes burned. She nodded faintly, unable to trust her voice. Lily grinned, then broke into a slightly off-key but heartfelt version of "Happy Birthday." Daniel joined in with his deep voice, the two harmonizing in a way that filled the small bakery with unexpected warmth. Eva closed her eyes and made a wish. For the first time in 4 years, she wished for something simple: not to be alone anymore. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't staring at empty chairs or silent candles. She was staring at a carpenter with kind eyes and a little girl with too much light for her small body. Strangers, yes, but in that moment, they felt like the closest thing to family she had known in years. And deep inside her chest, something she thought was long dead flickered to life again: hope. The birthday that should have been another lonely evening became the start of something Eva never expected. The sound of Daniel's deep voice and Lily's sweet, slightly off-key singing kept replaying in her mind like an echo she didn't want to lose. For nights after, Eva lay awake in her massive bed, staring at the ceiling, her fingers absently tracing the blanket. She kept remembering the way Lily's eyes sparkled when she handed over that homemade cupcake, the way Daniel looked at her, not at her wheelchair, not at her broken body, but at her. It had been years since someone had looked at her that way. At the Lancaster mansion, everything was polished, perfect, untouched. She had nurses who came and went, staff who spoke to her politely, cooks who prepared meals she rarely tasted. Yet all that perfection only magnified her emptiness. Birthdays came with bank transfers and 2-line text messages from her father. Holidays were dinners with staff members who were paid to pretend it was family. The silence was suffocating. So when she rolled into the park 1 week later, she wasn't sure what she was hoping for. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was something more. She stopped near the pond, her wheelchair still, watching the ducks glide lazily across the water. "Miss Eva." The high-pitched voice made her spin her chair, and her heart jumped. Lily was sprinting toward her, her brown curls bouncing, holding a paper bag of breadcrumbs. Daniel trailed behind, balancing 2 coffees, his eyes crinkling with surprise and warmth when he spotted Eva. "You came back," Lily said breathlessly, holding the bag out like it was treasure. "You have to help us feed the ducks. Daddy says ducks are happier when more people share." "How?" Daniel chuckled, setting the coffees on the bench. "She doesn't take no for an answer," he said, meeting Eva's gaze. "Hope you don't mind company." Eva shook her head quickly. "Not at all," she said, and felt something inside her loosen. They spent the next hour tossing breadcrumbs into the water. Lily gave each duck a dramatic name: Sir Quacks-a-Lot, Princess Feathers, Captain Splash. Eva laughed so hard she almost cried, and when Daniel saw that laugh, really saw it, he felt something stir inside him. Over the following weeks, it became a quiet routine. They met at the park, sometimes at the little bakery, sometimes at a corner coffee shop, where Lily colored pictures while the adults talked. Their conversations started light. Books, the weather, silly things Lily said. But slowly, as trust grew, deeper truths surfaced. One rainy afternoon, while Lily was busy building a tower of sugar packets at the coffee shop table, Daniel told Eva about Sarah. "She was a kindergarten teacher," he said softly, staring at his coffee like it was a window into the past. "She thought every child was a universe. Our apartment walls, she painted them with forests and stars. She wanted Lily to grow up believing anything was possible. She knew the pregnancy was risky, but she faced it with a smile I'll never forget. I thought I was strong, but she was stronger. His voice cracked, but not with raw anguish, more like the worn smoothness of a stone turned over in his hand 1,000 times. He didn't hide his grief. He lived alongside it. Eva sat quietly, her throat tight. Then, for the first time, she opened the door to her own pain. The accident was sudden, she whispered. I don't even remember the impact. Just a second of flying, then darkness. When I woke up in the hospital, my father was there, not holding my hand, not crying. He was negotiating with the doctors, discussing my care as if I wasn't even in the room, like I was a liability, a problem to manage. Her voice trembled. He gave me the best doctors, the best nurses, but never himself. And after a while, I realized that was worse than the chair. Worse than losing my legs was losing my father. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. He let the silence hold her words, let her grief breathe without rushing to fix it. Then Lily skipped over, holding up a messy drawing. Miss Eva, do you want to meet my dragon? He only eats marshmallows. Eva laughed through her tears, taking the paper carefully. I think I'd love to meet him. The heaviness lifted. Daniel smiled at the sight of her laughter, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar and dangerous hope. Little by little, their lives began to braid together. Daniel invited Eva to his workshop one afternoon. The place smelled of sawdust and varnish, the floor scattered with wood shavings. He showed her a rocking chair he was finishing for a client, smoothing the edges with calloused hands. Wood's funny, he said. It cracks, it warps. But if you're patient, if you cut along the grain and don't fight it, you can turn it into something strong, something that lasts. Eva ran her fingers along the smooth armrest, the grain warm under her skin. You make it sound like people, she murmured. Daniel met her eyes. Maybe it is. Another time, Lily insisted that Eva join their picnic at the park. Daniel spread a blanket, and Eva sat at the edge in her chair, eating sandwiches while Lily invented fairy tales about the clouds above them. At one point, Lily leaned against Eva's arm, sighing. You laugh different when you're with us, she said seriously. It's a happy laugh. Eva blinked hard, caught off guard by the child's honesty. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had noticed her laugh at all. It was Lily's innocence that bridged the heavy silences, and it was Daniel's steadiness that gave Eva permission to share pieces of herself she had hidden for years. One evening, while Lily was doodling in her notebook, Daniel reached across the cafe table. His fingers brushed Eva's for the briefest second. She froze, her breath catching, then looked up. Their eyes met. The world outside dimmed. Eva, Daniel said quietly, his voice low, steady. I need you to know something. Lily and I, we're not here because we feel sorry for you. You make our days brighter. You make us better. Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't look away. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, her voice breaking. Neither do I, Daniel confessed. But maybe we can figure it out together. It wasn't a love declaration. Not yet, but it was a promise. From then on, their days filled with small miracles. Lily teaching Eva to fold paper cranes, giggling when they came out lopsided. Daniel quietly moving chairs at restaurants so Eva's wheelchair fit perfectly, without her asking. Eva reading bedtime stories to Lily, switching voices for each character until the little girl laughed so hard she hiccuped. Piece by piece, moment by moment, they began to feel like something resembling a family. Not because life had given them perfection, but because they had chosen each other in their brokenness. And for the first time since the accident, Eva let herself believe. Maybe her life wasn't over. Maybe, just maybe, it was only beginning. Eva had started to forget the weight of silence. Her days were no longer endless corridors in the mansion. They were laughter in the park, the smell of sawdust in Daniel's workshop, Lily's little hand tugging at hers. For the first time in 4 years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. But happiness has a way of drawing shadows. And in Eva's life, shadows always took the shape of her father. Richard Lancaster noticed the change in his daughter. He wasn't blind, he saw the way. She smiled at her phone when a message came in, the sudden brightness in her eyes when she announced she was going out. He paid his staff too well for them to stay quiet. One evening, a report landed on his mahogany desk. Eva has been frequently seen at the park and a bakery with a man and his child. Richard didn't like questions he couldn't answer, so he hired a private investigator. The file came back thick with photographs. Eva sitting in her wheelchair beside a carpenter in plain clothes. Eva laughing with a child. Eva, his daughter, exposed, vulnerable, in the company of strangers he hadn't vetted, hadn't chosen, hadn't approved. Daniel Morris, 30 years old, carpenter, widower, a modest income, a small rented house, a workshop that barely kept him afloat. To Richard, it was obvious. This man wasn't there by chance. He was there to take advantage. By the time Eva rolled into her father's study that night, Richard had already decided the verdict. The study smelled of leather and power. Screens on the wall flickered with stock tickers. The glow from the fireplace painted Richard's face in sharp, unforgiving lines. "You will cease all contact with this man immediately," he said, without preamble, eyes still fixed on his laptop. Eva froze. "What?" Richard finally looked up. His gaze was sharp, cold, the same look that had broken corporate rivals in boardrooms. "Don't play dumb, Daniel Morris. A carpenter, a widower with a child. He's using you, Eva. What else could he possibly want from you?" The words landed like a slap. "What else could he want from someone like you?" Eva's voice trembled. "Someone like me? You mean your broken daughter? The one you can't even stand to look at because I remind you that you can't control everything?" Richard's jaw tightened. "I'm protecting you. You've been sheltered. You don't understand how the world works." Eva let out a bitter laugh. "Sheltered? I've been imprisoned. Do you even realize Daniel and Lily see me? Really see me? Not as a liability, not as a project. When was the last time you looked at me without seeing a problem you needed to fix?" Richard stood, his full height casting a shadow over her. "Enough. If you continue seeing him, I'll take legal action. I'll claim he's exploiting a disabled woman. I'll destroy his little carpentry business. Do you want that on your conscience?" Eva felt the air leave her lungs. She knew her father wasn't bluffing. She had watched him crush competitors without blinking. If he set his sights on Daniel, on Lily, they wouldn't stand a chance. That night, Eva sat in her room, phone trembling in her hands. She typed slowly, every word cutting her like glass. "I can't see you anymore. Please don't contact me. I'm sorry." Her thumb hovered over the screen. She imagined Lily's innocent face, Daniel's warm eyes, the way he'd said, "You make us better." She hit send anyway. Daniel read the message 3 times, then a 4th, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something else. The words were cold, final, so unlike Eva. His chest felt hollow, his hand numb around the phone. When Lily padded into the living room hours later, she found her father sitting in the dark, phone still glowing in his palm. "Daddy, why are you sad?" she whispered, climbing into his lap. Daniel swallowed hard. "Miss Eva can't see us anymore, sweetheart." His voice cracked. She doesn't want us around." Lily frowned deeply, her little brow furrowing. "But she loves us," she said simply. "I know she does. She smiles different when she sees us. Real smiles, not pretend ones." Daniel hugged her tightly, his throat burning. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that love wasn't always enough? For 3 days, he respected Eva's message. He didn't call, he didn't text, he didn't show up at the park or the bakery, but every piece of wood in his workshop reminded him of her. Every half-finished chair carried the story he wanted to tell her. Every night, Lily went to bed without singing. The house felt dim, as if even the light bulbs had lost their courage. On the 4th day, Lily broke the silence. "Daddy, is Miss Eva gone because we're not rich? Because we don't live in a big house?" The question cracked something open in Daniel. He couldn't let his daughter believe love depended on bank accounts. He couldn't let her grow up thinking kindness and connection weren't enough. He set his jaw. "Get your coat, Lily, we're going to see her." The Lancaster mansion rose before them like a fortress. High iron gates, security cameras, guards in uniform. A world built to keep people like Daniel out. "I'm sorry, sir," the guard said firmly. "You're not on the list." Daniel clenched his fists. Behind the gate, the mansion loomed beautiful, cold, unreachable. Lily pressed her face against the bars. Her voice trembled but carried like a bell. Miss Eva, we miss you. Please come back." Her small cry pierced the quiet night, floating past stone walls and manicured gardens. Inside the mansion, Eva sat in her room, staring blankly at the ceiling. She hadn't left since that night in her father's study. Her phone lay silent on the table, mocking her. But then she heard it, Lily's voice, clear and pleading, cutting through the thick silence. Her hands trembled as she wheeled herself to the window. She saw them, Daniel standing tall, one hand on Lily's shoulder, both of them looking lost. Something inside Eva snapped. Not broke, snapped back into place, like a bone realigned after years out of joint. She thought of every time she had obeyed her father, every birthday spent alone, every choice she had surrendered for the sake of peace. And she realized, protecting Daniel and Lily from her father meant nothing if it destroyed them all. Eva turned her chair sharply. She wheeled toward the service elevator, the one staff used to avoid the main floors. Her hands shook, but determination propelled her. She reached the kitchen. Maria, the cook who had known her since childhood, looked at her once and silently opened the back door. "Be happy, Mija," Maria whispered, her eyes wet. Eva rolled into the night air, cold wind cutting against her cheeks. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. For the first time in years, she was choosing for herself. The rain had turned the city into a blur of silver and shadow. Eva pushed her wheelchair with all the strength she had left, her palms burning against the wet rims, arms aching with every thrust forward. Her father's words still echoed in her head, threats like iron chains, cold and final. But Lily's voice at the gate had broken something loose inside her. She couldn't stay locked in that mansion another second. By the time she reached Sweet Moments Bakery, her dress clung to her skin, and her hair stuck in damp strands across her face. The little bell above the door chimed as she pushed it open, the warm air inside wrapping around her like a lifeline. The bakery was almost empty. A few customers lingered with coffee cups, heads turning at the sight of the drenched young woman in a wheelchair. But Eva's eyes found only one table. Their table. Daniel sat with his head bowed, fingers curled loosely around a half-empty cup. Lily doodled quietly beside him, her usual chatter gone, her little face clouded. When Eva rolled inside, both looked up. For a breathless second, no one moved. Then Lily's eyes lit up, brighter than the bakery lights. She dropped her crayon and bolted across the floor. "Miss Eva." She threw her arms around Eva, unbothered by the rain soaking through her clothes. "You came back. I knew you would. I told Daddy you loved us. I told him." Eva's throat tightened so hard she couldn't speak. She pulled the little girl closer, clinging to the warmth of her tiny body as though it could anchor her. Daniel rose slowly. He looked at Eva, really looked. The rain dripping from her hair, her trembling shoulders, the fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. His jaw clenched, torn between relief and fear. "You're freezing," he said softly. He shrugged out of his jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders, his hands lingering for just a second, grounding her. "What are you doing here, Eva?" Eva lifted her gaze to his, her voice trembling but steady. "I'm choosing. For the first time in 4 years, I'm choosing. I choose you. I choose Lily. I choose us. My father can threaten all he wants, but I won't live in that prison anymore." The words hit Daniel like a hammer and a blessing all at once. He dropped to one knee beside her, meeting her eyes at level. "Are you sure?" His voice was low, careful. "He could make things very difficult. He could ruin my work, my home. He could hurt us." Eva cupped his cheek with her cold, trembling hand. "Let him try. I've already lost my legs. I won't lose my heart too. And you and Lily, you are my heart now." Daniel's eyes filled. But before he could speak, the bakery door slammed open. The room flinched as a tall figure stormed in, rain dripping from his ruined suit. Richard Lancaster filled the space with sheer presence, his fury radiating like heat. His eyes locked onto Eva. "Enough," he thundered. "Eva, you're coming home. Now." The entire bakery went silent. Even the hum of the espresso machine seemed to hush. Eva froze, but Daniel stood, instinctively placing himself between her and Richard. His broad frame wasn't confrontational, but protective, unyielding. And then Lily stepped forward. 6 years old, barely 40 pounds. She planted herself in front of Eva's wheelchair, her chin lifted like a soldier's. "You're mean," she declared, her little voice cutting through the tension like a bell. "You're her daddy, but you're mean. My daddy says family means being there, not just buying things. You make Miss Eva cry. That's not what daddies are supposed to do." A collective gasp rippled across the bakery. Even strangers leaned in, captivated by the tiny warrior challenging a giant. Richard blinked, stunned. For the first time, his power seemed to falter. "You don't understand, little girl," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. "I'm protecting my daughter." Lily shook her head firmly. "No, you're protecting yourself. You don't want to feel sad. But my daddy feels sad about Mommy every day. And he doesn't run away. He stays. That's what love is. Staying." The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Customers shifted uncomfortably, watching the CEO of Lancaster Technologies face a truth too pure to argue with. Richard turned back to Eva, his voice cracking. "Eva, please. He's not your future. He's nothing. You deserve more than this." Eva's voice rang out, trembling but fierce. "More than what, Dad? More than love? More than people who actually see me? Do you even know what I needed when I woke up in that hospital, paralyzed and terrified? I needed you, not doctors, not nurses, not a mansion or a team of staff, just you. But you weren't there. You never stayed." Her words struck him harder than any shareholder's betrayal. Richard's shoulders sagged, his face pale. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, his mask of control cracking. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm, almost gentle. "She's right. You think I don't know fear. When Sarah died, I wanted to quit. I wanted to follow her, but Lily needed me. I stayed, even when it hurt. That's what Eva needs too. Not your empire, not your money, just you." Richard's gaze snapped to Daniel, a storm of emotions in his eyes. Anger, grief, disbelief. But beneath it all, recognition. Because he knew this man wasn't lying. Silence filled the bakery. The rain beat against the windows, a steady rhythm like a ticking clock. And then, slowly, Richard sank into a chair. He looked older than Eva had ever seen him, his power gone, his wealth meaningless, his eyes hollow with something close to regret. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered. "When your mother died, I built walls out of work. I thought if I made enough money, if I grew the company big enough, it would make her proud. But when you got hurt, Eva, all my money couldn't fix it." He felt useless. Eva wheeled closer, reaching for his hand. Her fingers shook, but her voice was steady. "Then be useless with me. Sit with me. Cry with me. Laugh with me. You don't need to fix me, Dad. You just need to stay." Richard looked at her hand, fragile, trembling, yet holding more strength than all the boardrooms he had ever conquered. His throat worked, and for the first time in years, he let himself feel the weight of his daughter's pain. Lily, sensing the moment, piped up with the innocent timing only a child could have. "Does this mean we can all be a family now? Because I really, really want Miss Eva to be my mommy." Daniel exhaled a shaky laugh. Eva's tears spilled freely, and Richard almost smiled, the lines of his face softening. He hadn't surrendered completely. The walls weren't gone, but for the first time in 4 years there was a crack wide enough for light to seep through. And in that little bakery, drenched in rain and truth, Richard Lancaster stayed. He didn't walk out. He didn't run to his office. He sat with his daughter, across from a carpenter and a child, and allowed himself finally to be human again. For the first time in years, Richard Lancaster did not retreat to his office after a confrontation. He didn't call his lawyers, didn't fire staff for negligence, didn't drown himself in stock numbers to silence the storm in his chest. Instead, He sat in a small bakery, rain dripping from his ruined suit, holding the trembling hand of his daughter. It was awkward, painful, unfamiliar, but he stayed. The bakery owner, sensing the fragile truce, brought over fresh cups of coffee and warm pastries. No one spoke for a while. Lily leaned against Eva's arm, humming softly, and Daniel sat with quiet watchfulness, as if ready to defend his family again if needed. Richard sipped the bitter coffee like a man drinking medicine he wasn't sure would work. That night, he didn't drag Eva back to the mansion. Instead, he asked quietly, "Can I drive you home?" Eva hesitated, then shook her head. "Not tonight, Dad." She glanced at Daniel and Lily. "I'm not ready to leave them yet." Richard's lips pressed tight, pride fighting with pain, but he nodded. For once, he didn't push. The days that followed were strange. Richard tried to reach out, fumbling like a man learning to walk for the first time. He called Eva in the morning just to ask how she slept. He asked her nurse about her schedule, then showed up uninvited at her physical therapy session. At first, Eva bristled. "Dad, you don't need to watch me stretch bands and practice transfers." But Richard shook his head, his voice rough. "I missed 4 years. I won't miss another minute if I can help it." He stood silently by as the therapist guided her through painful repetitions. His expensive shoes looked out of place against the gym's scuffed floor, his hands twitching as if he wanted to help but didn't know how. When Eva's arms trembled with fatigue, he knelt awkwardly, holding the straps steady so she could finish one more rep. She didn't thank him, not right away. But later that night, when she texted Daniel about the session, she admitted something surprising. "He didn't try to fix me. He just stood there." Maybe that's enough. Richard's next step was harder. Daniel had invited Eva and Lily over for a simple dinner: grilled chicken, salad, a loaf of bread warm from the oven. To everyone's shock, Richard showed up at the carpenter's small house, looking like a giant in a dollhouse. The atmosphere was stiff. Richard sat at the table, clearly unused to mismatched chairs and the smell of wood shavings drifting from the workshop. He eyed Daniel cautiously, as if unsure whether to treat him as an enemy or an ally. But then Lily broke the tension in her usual way. She plopped a handmade paper crown onto Richard's head and announced, "Now you're not a CEO, you're just Grandpa." The room froze. Richard blinked, the paper crown slightly crooked on his head. Daniel nearly choked on his drink. Ava's eyes widened. And then for the first time in decades, Richard laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not the sharp bark he used in boardrooms. A real laugh, deep and startled, spilling out before he could stop it. Lily beamed. "See? You can be fun." Dinner went better after that. Richard asked Lily about school, listened as Daniel described his workshop, even admitted quietly that he had never built anything with his own hands. Daniel offered to show him sometime. Richard nodded, though he looked like a man agreeing to parachute from a plane. In the weeks that followed, Richard kept trying. He came to the park with them once, sitting stiffly on a bench while Lily fed ducks. He watched as Daniel adjusted Eva's chair in the grass, his hands sure, his movements natural. For the first time, Richard saw what his money had never provided: care without obligation, love without condition. But it wasn't easy. There were nights he slipped back into old habits, staying late at the office until Eva called him out. "Are you working or running away again?" He flinched at the words but forced himself to come over the next day, sitting quietly at her side instead of retreating. There were moments of jealousy, too, watching Daniel push Eva's chair, hearing her laugh at something he said, seeing Lily curl up in Eva's lap as though she had always belonged there. Richard felt like an outsider in his own daughter's life. One evening, unable to hold it in, he asked bluntly, "Eva, are you sure about him? About this life? He's not like us." Eva's eyes softened, but her reply was sharp. "Exactly, Dad. He's not like us, and that's the best thing that ever happened to me." The truth silenced him. Slowly, almost painfully, Richard learned to stay. He began showing up at Daniel's workshop in the evenings. At first, he hovered uselessly, his manicured hands awkward around tools. But Daniel, patient as always, showed him how to sand wood, how to hold a chisel. The first time Richard smoothed a chair arm with his own strength, his eyes widened like a boy discovering he could create something instead of buying it. "This," Daniel said quietly, "is what staying feels like. It's not about fixing everything at once. It's about showing up, shaving off rough edges little by little." Richard didn't reply, but his hands stilled on the wood as he let the lesson sink in. One night, after another clumsy attempt at helping Eva transfer into bed, Richard sat heavily in the chair beside her. His tie was loosened, his face lined. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, quietly, Richard said, "I'm sorry, Eva." Her breath caught. He had apologized for deals gone wrong, for missed deadlines, for minor inconveniences, but never for this. "I thought, if I kept building, if I stayed busy, I could outrun the helplessness. But I see now I wasn't running from your pain. I was running from mine, from the truth that I couldn't fix you, and in trying to avoid that, I left you alone." His voice cracked. "I left you when you needed me most." Eva's eyes filled. She reached for his hand. "You can't change the past, Dad, but you can be here now. That's all I've ever wanted." Richard gripped her hand, his eyes wet. And for the first time since the accident, Eva felt like she had her father back. Not the CEO, not the untouchable man in boardrooms, but the dad who used to read her bedtime stories when she was little. That night, Lily, curled up sleepily in Eva's lap, murmured, "See, Miss Eva? Families can be fixed, even broken ones." Eva kissed the top of her head, smiling through tears. "Yes, sweetheart, they can." And as Daniel turned off the workshop lights and Richard sat quietly beside them, it felt for the first time that they were no longer three separate worlds colliding. They were slowly, painfully, beautifully becoming one. The bakery smelled of sugar and fresh bread, just like the first day Eva had sat there alone. But today it wasn't quiet. It was filled with voices, laughter, and the sound of guitars strumming softly in the corner. White ribbons draped along the walls, bouquets of wildflowers lined the windows, and sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, turning the air golden. It was Eva's 23rd birthday, and it was her wedding day. She sat in her wheelchair before a mirror in the back room, her hands trembling as she smoothed the lace of her gown. It had been her mother's dress, carefully altered so the fabric flowed elegantly around her chair. Lily had insisted on decorating the wheels with flowers and ribbons, and now they looked like something out of a storybook. Eva's reflection hardly felt like her own. For so long, she had seen herself only as broken, trapped. But today her eyes sparkled. Today she looked like a bride. A knock sounded. The door creaked open, and Richard stepped inside. He was in a simple grey suit, a far cry from the expensive armor he once wore to boardrooms. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened his tie. "You look just like your mother," he whispered, voice cracking. Eva's throat tightened. She turned, wheeling closer. "Thank you, Dad, for being here, for staying." Richard nodded, emotion flickering across his face. He reached for her hand, his touch careful, reverent. "I've missed too many moments, but not this one. I promised myself I'd walk you down the aisle even if it looks different than I imagined." Eva squeezed his hand. "It doesn't matter how it looks. What matters is that you're here." The guests gathered inside the bakery weren't the elites who once filled Richard's parties. They were people who mattered. Daniel's carpenter friends with rough hands and soft smiles, the bakery staff who had watched the love story unfold, Eva's old classmates who had slowly returned when she opened herself again. And then there was Lily. Dressed in a yellow dress with sunflowers in her hair, she clutched her basket of petals, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. "Miss Eva, don't worry," she whispered when she peeked into the room. "I'll make the prettiest flower path ever." Eva laughed, tears welling. "I don't doubt that for a second." When the music began, Richard positioned himself at her side. Slowly, carefully, he pushed her wheelchair forward, each step a vow unspoken. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder as they moved down the makeshift aisle between rows of family and friends. Every eye in the room was on her, but for the first time in her life, Eva didn't shrink from the attention. She lifted her chin, radiant, the fear that had once defined her gone. At the end of the aisle stood Daniel, his suit slightly wrinkled, his tie imperfect, but his eyes, those warm, steady eyes, shone with a love that took Eva's breath away. Lily skipped ahead, scattering petals with wild abandon, her giggles echoing like bells. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt. The bakery owner, who had witnessed their first meeting, stood as officiant. His voice trembled as he spoke, overcome by the honor. Daniel took Eva's hands. His voice was rough, but every word was steady. Eva, you've shown me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose broken pieces fit yours. You made me believe in family again. I promise to push your chair when you're tired, to carry you when needed, and to stand by you even when life feels impossible. More than anything, I promise to always see you, not your wheelchair, not your pain, just you, my partner, my love. Ava's tears spilled freely as she spoke her vows. Daniel, you and Lily gave me back my life. You didn't see my chair as the end, you saw it as part of me. You gave me laughter when I thought I'd forgotten how to smile. You gave me a family when I thought I'd always be alone. I promise to be the mother Lily deserves, the wife you deserve, and to choose us every single day, no matter how hard it gets. When they kissed, the room erupted in cheers. Lily squealed, throwing the rest of her petals into the air, and everyone laughed through tears. The reception that followed was nothing like the corporate galas Richard once hosted. Instead of string quartets, Daniel's carpenter friends played bluegrass on guitars and fiddles. Instead of champagne towers, there were trays of fresh pastries and pitchers of homemade lemonade. Eva spun her chair in circles on the dance floor, while Lily danced around her, laughing until she collapsed into Daniel's arms. Richard even let Lily drag him onto the floor, where he moved stiffly at first, then looser as the little girl cheered him on. At one point, Richard surprised everyone by stepping forward to speak. The room hushed, expecting a polished CEO speech. Instead, his voice shook. For most of my life, I thought strength meant never needing anyone. I thought success meant never showing weakness. But my daughter, this man, and this little girl, his voice broke, eyes wet, taught me that strength is in staying, that love is in showing up. I can't undo the years I lost, but I can promise to be here now, and I am so grateful they let me try. Eva sobbed openly. Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Lily shouted, "Grandpa, you're doing amazing!" and laughter filled the room. Later, when the party began to wind down, Eva wheeled outside for air. The stars glittered, rare and bright above the city. Daniel followed, carrying 2 slices of cake. No one should eat cake alone, he teased, echoing the words that had started everything. Eva laughed, pulling him close. "And I never will again, right?" "Never," Daniel said. His hand slid gently to her stomach. Eva froze, her breath catching. She hadn't told him yet. "How?" He smiled softly. Lily noticed. "She told me you've been sick in the mornings. She's already planning to teach the baby everything she knows." Tears filled Eva's eyes. Joy and fear tangled in her chest. "The doctor said, it might be complicated. With my condition." Daniel knelt beside her chair, his hand warm over hers. "Then we'll face it. Together. That's what we do." 6 months later, in a quiet hospital room, Eva held a tiny baby boy against her chest. Daniel sat beside her, awe written across his face, while Lily leaned close, whispering promises into her baby brother's ear. Richard stood at the bedside, his hands trembling as he reached for the child. When the baby's tiny fingers wrapped around his pinky, Richard's composure broke completely. Tears streamed freely as he whispered, "Hello, grandson." They named him Samuel Richard Morris. Samuel, after Sarah's father. Richard, after the grandfather who had finally learned to stay. Lily looked solemnly at the baby. "You need to know something, Samuel. We're a special family. We chose each other. That's the best kind of family." Eva closed her eyes, overwhelmed. From a lonely girl with a silent birthday cake to this moment surrounded by love, laughter, and life. Her wish had come true. Not only had she stopped being alone, She had found her home. Life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes the greatest love stories don't begin with fireworks or perfect timing. They begin in the quiet corner of a bakery, with a lonely cake and a simple question, "Can we join you?" Eva's journey reminds us that no matter how much money, power, or influence we have, it cannot replace the warmth of presence. For years, she lived surrounded by luxury but starved for connection. What healed her wasn't doctors or mansions. It was a carpenter's steady kindness, a little girl's innocent courage, and eventually, a father brave enough to admit his failures and stay. Daniel's story teaches us something just as powerful, that grief doesn't have to end us. He carried the weight of loss, yet chose to build joy for his daughter, and in doing so, opened his heart again when he least expected it. And Lily, well, Lily proves that sometimes children understand love better than we do. Her small voice, unafraid to tell the truth, broke through walls no one else could. Together, they showed us that family isn't always the one we're born into. Sometimes, family is chosen piece by piece, day by day. It's in the moments when we stay, even when it's hard. It's in choosing love, again and again. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. You are never too broken to be loved, and it's never too late to change. Healing doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means you stop walking or rolling alone. What would you do if you were in Eva's shoes? Would you have had the courage to choose love, even against the odds? If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Share it with someone who might need the reminder that love can bloom in the most unexpected places. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, tales of resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that changes everything. Because at the end of the day, we all need the same thing Eva wished for on her lonely birthday, not to be alone. And maybe, just maybe, a reminder that love can find us anywhere, even in the quiet corner of a bakery.